So let's look at some of the beliefs, if you like, what I would call false reincarnation beliefs, and let's look at them from the point of view of love. Now you have it, you have the list there. What I'll get you to do maybe is if you just yell out the first belief, and then we'll look at it. So yell out the first belief.
Karma, whatever you sow, you shall reap, is paid during many lifetimes.
Okay, karma is paid through many lifetimes. You've heard this, right?
Yes.
In other words, here's you, if you're a female, and you lived a life, so let's call that your life, then you passed. You went to the spirit world, so you're now in the spirit world. What normally does most reincarnation beliefs say at that point? A bit of a life review, whatever. And then to progress, you have to come back to Earth as another person. And the reason why you have to is because you have karma, or law of compensation, I would call it, or we could call it what you sow you reap. In other words, you sowed some nasties, and so you're going to reap some nasties now that get imposed upon this lifetime. But there's only a few snags with it. One snag is that you can't remember what you did. Follow me? So that makes it pretty hard, doesn't it? Like, how do you deal with karma from a previous lifetime that you can't remember you had?
Well, that's why you've got to keep coming back.
That's why you've got to keep going back.
Endlessly.
Endlessly. Now, can you see already, if we understand the soul too, we can start seeing that if I had karma from a previous lifetime and I reincarnate, that karma will affect the law of attraction in my current lifetime, which will even cause more law of attraction events, which I may make choices about that are disharmonious with love. And so the next time I come, I could actually be in a much worse condition. Now there are some beliefs on earth that say that actually I end up like an ant. Sorry, that's meant to be an ant. And because of the choices that I made in the previous lifetime.
Where do you go from there?
Where do you go from being an ant?
Amoeba.
Only up. Only up.
Okay.
Right. Now, let's look at the love in this process. Let's look at this now from a parent's perspective. Right? So what we're really saying from a parent's perspective is little what's her name? Little Sally, right? Little Sally did some wrong things. She made some wrong choices. Why did she make them? It wasn't her fault, was it? It's because of her parents and whatever. But anyway, she made some wrong choices, right? She made some wrong choices. So what I'm going to do now is face her up to those choices in the spirit world, and then send her back to correct those choices. But I'm not going to tell her what they were. Now, does that sound very fair to you? Does that sound loving to you? Can you see what's going on there? If it was, wouldn't the loving thing be to tell you? Or that you've got a record of them inside of you that you can connect to and release? That you know, yeah, last life I did this, last life I did that, last life I was a mini-skirt dancer. And, this is the choices that I made. I decided that I'd go to... It would be great to remember it, wouldn't it? If you're going to deal with the karma, you need to remember it. Isn't that not true?
Isn't the whole philosophical basis behind that God isn't a separate soul? So therefore, when you say it wouldn't be loving from God's point of view, those people don't even see it from that perspective. So
for some, God isn't a separate soul at all. No, that's right. But for some, God is just fragmented into you. In other words, we're all God. But we're all bits of God.
God's everything.
Yeah. Well, yeah, even animals, plants and everything are all God as well. Yeah. Right. So God, in other words, under those circumstances, is not an entity. So that's a very Buddhist viewpoint. Whereas a more Hindu viewpoint is that God is an entity, a separate entity, and we are separate entities that go through the cycle. of life.
The concept of not being loving is only relevant if there's a being to be loving, isn't it? If God's everything, then who cares whether it's loving or not? It's just the way it is. I mean, doesn't that follow?
Yeah, that's right. See, what's happened with a lot of these beliefs is we've come up with ways of justifying pain. Can you see that? So one good way of justifying pain is to say, oh, there's no such thing as pain. Actually, it's all just all part of the same thing. Quite often you hear like, you know, pain and pleasure, it's just all the one thing. Does it feel like the one thing to you? No, it's funny that, isn't it? It doesn't feel like the one thing, but we say it anyway. It helps. So what happens a lot of times is we tell ourselves messages which we then come to believe so that we can explain to ourselves why we're in so much pain and suffering. But what actually happens with that, our pain and suffering often doesn't alleviate all of our entire life. And as we'll talk about in a minute, even as a spirit often doesn't alleviate because of these beliefs. And so in the end, these belief systems are unloving in themselves. They are actually damaging your own viewpoint of yourself, your own viewpoint of others, and your own viewpoint of the universe. Right? And anything that does that is not harmonious with love. So, can you see how it all works? We can get very philosophical here, right? Which I don't want to really do. But we can get very philosophical. And by the way, I just need to point out too, there's lots of spirits who have come for this discussion. It's one reason I'm feeling a bit hot again. There's lots of spirits who have come to this discussion because they believe in reincarnation, but they are feeling locked up in the belief. They can't reincarnate onto Earth. They know they can't. They don't understand why. They feel they have to reincarnate onto Earth to progress, but they don't understand why they're not progressing and reincarnating on Earth and so forth. So there's quite a number of spirits who have been brought here for this discussion as well. So I will address things from a spirit perspective at times and from a person on Earth's perspective at times. But looking at this whole process firstly, is it loving to stop the person from knowing what they've done wrong? It's not loving, is it? Particularly if you're expecting them to correct it in the next existence. So why would God set up such a process? Well, you wouldn't think He would you? Would you? Like, would you with your children set up a process where you punish them for something even that they did 10 years ago, even after they've dealt with it? Would you set up a process where you set up this punishment process? Would you actually want the child, if this was your child, would you want them to go through this process without knowing?
Not anymore. But my understanding of when I used to study it, and I'm sitting on the fence, one of the guys put their hands up, it doesn't matter which way it goes for me, because I've gone beyond that years ago. My understanding of how I was taught on it was that the soul knows what it's in for when it comes back down onto the earth. The recall comes in, the illusion goes over, and it's fight for your life to get back up to the higher planes. And the ones who master that through the illusion get to go further on their path. The ones who don't get another opportunity again.
So in other words, you can't get up to this higher path till you master the illusion of the lower path.
That's how I was taught on reincarnation.
Now these are extensions to the original reincarnation beliefs. So what happened years and years and years ago, many millennia ago, many thousands of years ago, was that these beliefs were just very, very basic. The way they began actually was that a child would be born and it would have seemed to have very similar characteristics to a person who recently passed. And so what they would say then is that the breath of life, or the soul, it later became known as, entered the new child as it was born. So they started believing that this must be the reincarnation, now is the term, but back then it was just like the reliving or the rebirth of a person who was existing beforehand that they knew.
So that's get still chosen like that.
Yeah, it was presented like that very basically in the beginning. And then what's happened is there's certain conundrums, if you like, that are not solved by that belief. One of them is, would a God of love even allow that to occur? What's going on? You know, why? But as a result of that, the belief has taken many, many forms. So you've got that form that you've just mentioned, you know, with this whole process of going to a higher place by actually mastering the lower place. Then you've got other beliefs too, where it's like this is just a continuous cycle. There's that belief too, and you can actually get into a state of nirvana, if you like, on earth. That's also a belief. And so there's lots of different beliefs now associated to this reincarnation process. The key is to look at it with love every time. So let's look at that one that you mentioned, which was the belief that if you master it at the soul level, you awaken at the soul level somehow, the illusion will disappear and you'll now remember what you've experienced in the past, and then you'll work through it, which is obviously a different process again, and then once you've mastered that, you go to the higher place. Now there's a couple of things to do about that, isn't it? Firstly, we're basically saying that to get to a higher place we've got to keep returning. So it's a process of keeping returning. We also have to at some time have an awakening at the soul level. How do you have an awakening at the soul level if you've just been abused all your life and, you know, had some major damage put upon you in life after life after life after life that you haven't managed to actually have the awakening? What's going on there? Is that a loving thing to set up, do you feel? Would you set up that for your own children? That's a question, really. So can you see with every form of reincarnation belief, if we look at it from the point of view of love, there is always some holes in it.
How does the laws of attraction fit into that? Which is interesting, what you said. That there's so many abuse on the planet Earth right now. There's so many different levels.
Yep.
You couldn't build a library the size of Sydney time.
That's right.
So coming back to that,
Yep.
How does that fit into your belief on reincarnation not existing?
My belief isn't that reincarnation doesn't exist. There is a reincarnation, but I'll explain it later. Yeah. But in terms of how it fits in, everything that's happening on earth is the result of man's choices to walk away from God.
So there's been no interference. It's our choice.
Yeah. When you say no interference, there is a lot of interference from spirits. And that's something that I want to discuss in this process, because even these beliefs of reincarnation are very much interfered with by spirits.
There's also interstellar belief of reincarnation from other planets on the planet.
Certainly.
And extraterrestrial influences, which there's so much written on that for thousands of years.
Yes, but again, you need to understand what extraterrestrial influences are, which are all part of this spirit world versus material world discussion. Yeah, and they're all of those questions they all have very similar answers, actually, that are very simple. And that's the other thing to bear in mind, is that God makes simple things, like on earth here. Man, woman get together, have a child. Right? So how did you come into existence? At the soul level, obviously, God got together and had you as a child. God is constantly trying to illustrate to you the truth through your own life. And that's one of the ways. So the key thing here to bear in mind is that too, that the answers are actually going to be quite simple in the end. And the truth is always quite simple in the end. But usually a child can understand truth. The problem with most of religious beliefs on earth is they've been created by the intellect trying to understand emotions that they're not connecting to. And so, do you understand what I mean by that? Like, if you're in an emotional state, you don't understand it, you're not connecting to it, you're going to come up with all sorts of intellectual arguments and beliefs inside of yourself that then are spawned into religious beliefs and into religious movements even. And then there's religious movements breaking off of religious movements, and this is how we arrive at the condition that we arrive on the earth today, where nobody knows how to determine truth. And this is why I say to you, get back to the real simple thing, is it loving? Now, we can apply the same rule to any belief, including beliefs on Christianity. Is it loving to believe that one person, right, died for all of your errors? Is it loving to the one person? Obviously not, is it? So therefore it can't be a truth. It's quite simple, isn't it? If it's loving, then it can be truthful. If it's not loving, quite blatantly not loving to one person or to many, then it must be an error. So let's apply this back to the reincarnation beliefs. Yeah. So, can you see the karmic process as described by the reincarnation belief? And I'm not saying there's no such thing as karma, because there is. But can you see the process of trying to clear it on many lifetimes without even knowing what it is? Must be very difficult, and that's why often it feels impossible. And that's why it never generally occurs. Can you also see that there is a justification of certain treatment of different types of things in this? Can you see that? For instance, this type of person might be if we were talking about the Hindu system, what would we call them? A person who's gone down and down and down and down. And untouchable, yeah. Can you see how the belief actually encourages the treatment of certain people in a negative way? It's basically justifying me using that person now to clean my latrine, which is what actually occurs in India even now. They actually lower men who are of the untouchable caste into the sewerage, and they walk around in the sewerage in their body, like no protective clothing or anything, cleaning it, right? Getting rid of things in it. That's what happens. And the belief justifies it. Can you see that? If he done bad things, or she done bad things in her previous life, she deserves this treatment. Can you see? Gandhi had a lot to say about the belief, right? And when he was alive. Now, let's go even further. Let's say the person becomes an animal now. Can you see how it can even justify eating meat and justify poor treatment of animals? Can you see how that can occur? Just through that belief. Now, of course, the argument would be, oh, well, if I was enlightened, I wouldn't treat the untouchable in that way. But the truth is that whenever love is in a practice, the results will be loving. By their fruits you will recognise them. Right? What's the fruitage of these beliefs? We've got societies on earth that have believed these beliefs for thousands of years. Let's look at those societies and truly examine them in a clear, loving way. So not with judgment, but look at what the result is in that society. What's the result? Is it loving society? Or does it have these caste systems that have resulted from these beliefs? Can you see what's going on with many of these beliefs? By the way, again, I could apply the same thing to Christianity, could I not? It's like how much of women being put down in Christianity. So is that a loving belief? Okay. And how much were women mentioned even in the Bible? So don't you think there must have been a lot more women than actually were mentioned? Of course. So how much of those beliefs that, women can be sexually alluring and you've got to keep them separate and all those kind of things that were projected at women during those times, the same thing applies, of course. Unloving beliefs create unloving results. So what are some of the other beliefs? Reincarnation.
That the human soul reincarnates after a life of you that cannot be remembered in the spirit world.
Yeah.
The next one?
Let's have the next one.
That the human soul eventually becomes pure through a series of hundreds of incarnations.
Yeah. Who's read Conversations with God? Yep. Quite a lot of it. And in one of the books, I think he said to Neil Donald Walsh that he'd had 670 something incarnations. that Neil Donald Walsh couldn't remember. We can't, can he? He said that. So, does that feel like a loving process to you? Now, look at what happened in Neil Donald Walsh's life, personal life. He went through this really cataclysmic time in his life, didn't he, before he began communicating with the Spirit, claiming to be God. And this got a lot of beautiful information through as a result, but only because he was now focusing on his emotions, which is interesting in itself. And he began living in his passion, which caused this process to continue. So, a lot of these teachings, the New Age type teachings, are teaching this constant process of reincarnation over and over and over again. Now, let me ask you another question about childhood. If today your child was 3 years old and it was so high, right? And then in 3 years' time, your child was now 6 years old, but it's still so high. And then in 25 years' time, your child is what now, 31, whatever, and now it's still this high. Would you start to be worried? Why would you be worried? Because they're not growing. What's a basic thing that we see in the world around us with regard to growth? Just constant change, isn't it? Like you see, and you can see that everything grows. Now, if something results in you not growing, is that a loving thing then? Does it make any sense from even a natural perspective? It doesn't, does it? Obviously, from a God's perspective, He created, or she created, everything growing, everything changing constantly. And when you grow spiritually, you are going to change. Now, people who come back have similar life after lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. Are they growing? Are they even being given an opportunity to grow? How do you grow? By learning, isn't it? By learning from your mistakes, your past experience. If you can't remember your past experience, how are you going to learn from it? You can't, can you? Now, some will argue, well, it's only in the spirit world to learn from it, but if this is the area where you're clearing the karma, this is the area where you need to be learning from it, not there. You need to be learning from it here. Right? So, would you set up such a system? Just from a point of view of love yourself, I mean. Now, I'm not asking you to be God. I'm just asking you to, would you as a person set up this for your children? I'm sure the majority of us would. What else in that list that I put there?
I'll keep reading.
Yeah, you can keep reading.
That the human soul cannot progress in the spirit world, reincarnation is the only form of progression.
Alright, remember I said, and also almost all spiritual discussions about the spirit world say, that there are spheres in the spirit world. Now, up until recently, most people believe there are only 7, right? And so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right? Now there's a lot more than that, but let's go with what the beliefs are. So here I am on earth, I live my life on earth, I pass into, supposedly, the first sphere. It was my first incarnation. I have my life review. I go back to earth, I can't remember my life review. But now I'm meant to progress somehow on this life to get to the point where I can grow in love to this point, yeah? And then eventually to this point. And then to this point and so forth until I reach, you might call it, the pinnacle, if you like, where you don't need to reincarnate anymore. And in fact, in that place, a lot of these spiritual teachers say you have become God, or you become a part of God again, is the New Age type feeling, and so forth. Now, firstly, does it make sense to prevent the person from progressing unless they regress? Does that sound like this? You know, when you do in your own life, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. When you start doing that, like, it does feel like you're dancing, isn't it? Does it feel like you're actually progressing? Would you walk that way? So, if you wanted to walk from Maruchi across to Malulabar, you imagine 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1. How fast would that be? Does that seem like the most logical thing to do to you? It doesn't, does it? Why would God create what seems to be to us an illogical thing?
Because he's a punishing God, and that's why we're so mad at him.
Exactly. It's a justification, actually, for punishment and pain. See, what a lot of these beliefs began in was the feeling that they were being punished all the time came through a lot, right? Feeling emotionally. And they're trying to explain the reason for this punishment. Now, there were some people who didn't even believe in God, so they were trying to explain the reason for why they felt like they were getting punished. And they came up with some of these beliefs as a result, which do explain, to a degree, if you accept them, why it seems like you're getting punished in your life. Don't they? That's probably why how many of you in the past have actually believed in reincarnation? Like, full on. So the majority, right? So you must have believed in it for a reason. We'll talk about some of those reasons in the next section. Right? But can you see how there is a lot of flaws with the arguments from a point of view of love? Now, imagine if you did that. If you made a system where they couldn't progress into a new universe, let's call these new universes that are more loving. You couldn't progress into these new universes without going to the worst possible universe first and living that again. Doesn't that feel quite unfair? Like, you've done all the work here to get from there to there, and then you've got to go back here to get from there to there. How would you feel about that? How do you feel inside of yourself about it? Doesn't it feel unfair? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any logical sense. But how does it feel? It feels unfair if you let yourself feel about it. Would God create things that are unfair? If there was a loving God, would God create things unfair? Maybe I should ask that question.
I just got to give up authority. That's just like.
Sorry?
I said the one that you're talking about wouldn't.
Yeah, that's right.